Okay, those who may have watched this video when I had it online might want to jump to the around the 13-minute mark, or 13 to 14, the beginning of the first part of it. At that point, I'll reveal my screw-ups that took a lot of time. Wasted, really, in a sense, but I learned a little bit. But anyway, go to about the 13 and a half minute mark, and I'll give an update on what I did. Okay, as you know in the video I finished up, I moved the pulley, and I didn't actually show me testing it. So when I went to test it, and I started the engine up, there was a clunking noise coming from, obviously, the pulleys. The auger wasn't engaged. So when I engaged the wheels slightly, the noise would go away. When I let the wheels back out again, I should show that. Wheels in, the wheels went back, and then the noise came back. Did it a couple times, and then I shut it down. And then what I concluded was, when you pull this handle, you're actually, it's hard, you can't really see it. If you look at the disc underneath, you'll see that this pulls the drive belt bottom pulley back towards the engine. So what had happened was, when I pulled the pulley ahead, of course, as you saw in that video, it had mounting bolts with nuts on them. And so what happened was, the mounting bolts now came out and hit the mounting bolts facing the other way on the auger pulley. That's why when I pulled it back and engaged the wheels, the noise disappeared. I only did it a couple times, but that was it. So shut it down, and then of course I had to take it all apart. Now I moved the pulley slightly back a bit, but I also, recognizing that the mounting stud bolts on both pulleys protruded further than the nuts, I dremeled the ends off to give myself more clearance. Put it back together. Alignment looked decent. Went to start the engine wouldn't start. It just wouldn't start. I tried, and it seemed like there would be a puff out the muffler. I could not get it to start. My first thinking is, since one pulley hit the other that wasn't moving, it would want to stop the engine. I might have thrown the flywheel key, sheared the flywheel key. So that was what I did. I pulled the cup cover off, shroud, pulled the cup off, looked, I saw the flywheel key, looked okay, put it back together. Worked on it a bit more, no start. Then what I thought was, well, that pulley that stopped is running off the camshaft. So when that pulley stops, if I'm stopping the camshaft, the crankshaft wants to keep going. Maybe the gear on the crankshaft that runs the camshaft had twisted a bit on the crank. It's only a press fit, it turns out. And in fact, in order to make Honda engines run better, higher RPM for go-kart racing, you actually do that. You change that gear a little bit. So I started looking at valve timing. Timing looked all right. I opened it up, the cover. I actually changed the timing off by one tooth, and still nothing. Then I realized, well, probably I went the wrong direction anyway. Eventually I put it back where it should be, because valve timing looked okay. I had overlap at top dead center exhaust. I had the overlap box. Exhaust still open, intake starting to open. So that looked okay. I studied my stuff from go-karting days of 25 years ago about testing for valve centering and stuff like that. And I put it onto one of my forums. The thing was, I had compression. I had 150 PSI. And I had spark. I had a good spark. It would, but I changed coils anyway. I changed spark plugs anyway. It still would not fire up. Check the valve clearances. Well, I had supposed to be 4 to 8. I had 12 on the intake. I had 16 on the exhaust, which was kind of surprising because originally, if I may have mentioned in the previous video, this thing wouldn't run right under load because I had 0 clearance on the exhaust. So 4 to 8 the spec. Somehow maybe I ground it down too much and got 16, but it was running fine. So on that advice, I went and I bought a new exhaust valve. I couldn't get a new intake for a reasonable price, but I got a new exhaust valve. I set it up, ground it down, 4 thou clearance, the minimum, and now I can see the compression release working on that valve. Compression check, 90 psi. Sounds good, because what some people thought was the 150 psi, which is too much compression for the coil to fire. Even though, like I say, I used an Oregon tester that makes it jump a 1/4 inch. It still didn't work, didn't fire. So I'm really puzzled now. So I happened to bring home another blower from my daughter's, basically a Sears with the same engine. Made sure it was running, took the coil, took the spark plug from it, put it in this engine that had 90 psi, it wouldn't fire. So I'm thinking, I got to go back to square one on this. I've got spark, I've got compression, I think I've got good valve timing. I can't have spark timing at the right time. So I pulled the shroud, I pulled the cup again, and I look closer. Yeah, I see that key. I see the key in the flywheel groove. And then I said, there's no crankcase groove at the bottom of the key. I look to my right 90 degrees, and there's the other half of the key sitting in the crankshaft groove keyway. So it was the blinking flywheel key all the time. I guess it was easier for the flywheel key to shear and let the flywheel turn than it was for the crank gear, which is pressed on to actually move. So anyway, I pulled the flywheel off, replaced the key, and it fires right up. So lesson learned. I spent about 2 weeks, but it was fun. I got to review all my stuff on valve timing from my kart racing days, but it's still wasted time. So I'm putting it all back together because the beginning was I put new wheels on. I want to test the wheels. So last time I could get it all back together. Well, I had a little change on this lever down here. I thought there wasn't enough clearance between this lever where the cotter pin, I thought it was hitting on this, so I figured out how to disconnect this and redo it. Well, that was my first mistake, forgetting that this is a shaft and this has to be timed to this shaft. So I was getting wrong directions and everything else because this here was sliding on the shaft that goes underneath it. So I fixed that up. Then I go to test it again. Doesn't want to really, like, when I went to back it over the lip of the garage, it wanted to stop and didn't want to go very fast forward. And I had noticed that the original belt that was on it, I don't know where it is now, it was a cog belt, and it's really loose now. So it was really loose on here. So I thought, well, maybe I do need to change that belt. So I'm putting the new one on. But the other thing was, like I say, it was loose, and yet I wasn't sure if I had changed this pulley. And there wasn't a lot of tension here on this pulley. And the spring was over here, hooked onto here, and, you know, I thought, well, maybe I need to replace that spring, but it seemed okay before. Okay, you know what the idiot did? I had the spring that pulls the lever for this pulley hooked in this little notch here. It doesn't go in that blinking notch. It goes down underneath, right at the very bottom there's a notch. So that's why I had no tension. Anyway, I got the new belt on anyway, but because the belt's measured the same. So it's almost back together again. But I am going to do a test and show you it actually running right before I publish all this extra stuff. But live and learn. Well, finally got back at it all together again. I was going to do the test, as I said I would. Anyway, it turns out it had good traction now, but I still had a problem with forward, reverse, the speeds. And so what I decided was, I had gotten that lever down there, the bottom there, that there was, it was right at the very bottom, so it didn't allow me any leeway to adjust the right way for the speed. So I decided that this other thing, I still had to work on it a bit. So I went up underneath and positioned the drive rubber wheel in the position I thought was just right for the first gear, forward, and then adjusted, put some play down in that so that I could adjust it later. And now it actually, I got the right speeds. I got a decent forward speeds and reverse speeds. So until something else happens, this project might be done.